All right, everybody. Well, it's an honor to be with you today. If you don't know me by chance, my name is Matthew Rohrs. I serve as the CEO at Synapis, and we are super excited to share a sneak peek of our 2022 impact data. Our impact report is going to be completed soon, but we wanted to have this conversation with a really fascinating group of people. And sorry, yeah, thank you. If you've got background noise and can mute, that would be great. But on this call today, we've got entrepreneurs, we've got international partners, we've got investors, we've got church leaders, we've got donors, we've got advisors, a whole group of people who are helping to contribute to make the mission of Synapis possible. So just as we begin, from our hearts, we want to say thank you. Thank you for dedicating the time today. Thank you for helping to make all of this possible. And as we begin, I want to really just frame, why do we care about impact? Why dedicate time to an impact webinar? Why do we do an annual impact report? And there's a number of reasons, but I really wanted to key in on two. The first is the mission that motivates this work. The mission of Synapis is to make disciples of Jesus Christ and to alleviate poverty through the power of entrepreneurship. And because we feel called to that mission, because we believe that God has rallied us. I'm sorry, somehow I went on mute. When did I go on mute? How far back should I rewind the tape?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Muting
okay.
Some other. No, 3 seconds. You're good.
3 seconds. I don't know. Somehow I've never had that happen before on Zoom. That's fine. So why we care about impact? Number one, the mission. The mission of Synapis: make disciples and alleviate poverty through the power of entrepreneurship. So as we think about entrepreneurs all over the world, growing companies, fighting the fight of profitability and thinking about what role does a company play in God's kingdom, we care deeply about that. We want to understand that impact. And then specific to our role, we are called to be stewards. And so as we think about programs that we manage and relationships that we're building and this growing international network that we're going to talk about today, the way that we approach that is from one of understanding that we're stewards, that ultimately we're going to give account before God. What do we do with the opportunities that we've been given and the resources and all these incredible people who are giving their time and lending their talent to see this come together? And so that's why we look every year at impact really significantly in this report and in this annual survey, but also each and every week through the organization of trying to understand, God, how are we being faithful to be stewards? So Keegan, if you would share our presentation, I want to just make sure, if you're newer to Synapis, that you have an understanding of the name of the organization. Synapis is the Latin word for the mustard seed. And I'm going to read this passage from Mark chapter 4. Jesus famously said, "With what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable shall we use for it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when sown on the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes larger than all the garden plants and puts out large branches." And this is really interesting. "So that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." Other translations say can find rest in its branches. And so this picture is actually, if you've never seen this before, of a mature mustard plant. They can become as large as 10 feet in size. And we think one really exciting way to understand this parable is that when an entrepreneur takes the seed of an idea and grows that into an early stage venture, or maybe that continues to get traction, becomes a later stage, more mature company, as that grows, this interesting dynamic of the birds of the air making nests in its shade, we think is a really powerful picture of what happens when employees find work and people who depend on those jobs find increased disposable income. They get to go to school, they get access to better housing, they get access to better medical care. Families get to make good choices for themselves about how they want to raise their kids, how they want to invest in their church. So all of that points to, we think, the really special catalytic role that entrepreneurs play in every society around the world, but really powerfully in areas of the world where we see serious deprivation. And so I'd love if you could advance one more slide, please, just to talk a little bit about our plan for this call. And in a moment, I'll introduce Sylvie Somerville, who's helping to lead this with me. But we're really going to do 4 different things. The first is an overview of our impact process. So how do we think about impact at Synapis? What's the process that we put in play to pursue that? Second thing is we're going to key in on impact trends from 2022. So soon our impact report will be out, but we want to give you some behind the scenes thinking of what are some of the trends that we're most excited about that we're seeing in the data. Third is the future of impact measurement at Synapis. Everything we do is a commitment to continuous improvement, but we want to point to specifically in our monitoring, evaluation, and learning functional area, what do we see as our future? And then we're going to have a time of Q&A. So if along the way you have any questions, if you could send in the chat a direct message to Sylvie with whatever questions you have, we're going to try to leave about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So without further ado, I want to introduce Sylvie, and then I'm going to hand this over to her. So Sylvie is our Director of Impact and Global Network. She joined Synapis in 2018. She actually shared her 5-year work anniversary is just a couple of weeks from now. She's done an amazing job. So when she first joined us, she moved to Nairobi and was helping to lead our office there, which is our main office of operations. She has led our training program, so our Aspire program for idea stage entrepreneurs, our flagship Entrepreneur Academy, which is MBA level content that we contextualize in each market. She's had input into our acceleration and advisory. She also leads, as the title suggests, our growing global network, which we'll talk about later. And then on top of that, just to throw one more in, she has led our systems effort, so has helped build out our Salesforce system and has provided a lot of technical excellence there. So Sylvie has been an unbelievable team member and leader within Synapis, and I'm going to hand it over to her to walk through the next few steps in the agenda.
Amazing. Thanks, Matthew. I think for me, one of the best parts of my job and the 5 years at Synapis is having spent so much time in Nairobi and now spending a lot of time with our partners and the entrepreneurs they work with around the globe. I do get to be quite close to a lot of the stories, had a lot of good alumni friends when I lived in Kenya. And I think just as I kick off kind of some of our thinking about our impact process, and Matthew will share another story later, but I just wanted to tell you this quick story of one of my friends, Sherry, Kenyan woman who I met in early 2019. So now 4 years ago, just to give you a little taste of why we care, why I care. I've been in this space for a long time of working with small businesses and trying to measure impact and trying to figure out like what works and what's the best way to actually help communities grow and thrive. And there are no magic bullets for solving all the problems we want to solve, but I think being able to kind of watch the process of how entrepreneurs receive support, how they grow, how investing in the right business leader with the right skill set and passion and opportunity translates into these businesses that really do transform their communities. So Sherry Kahata, we just posted a blog post about her actually recently, but a friend of mine for the last 4 years, she runs a business called Savannah Space, and you can check out their website, beautiful stuff. Basically a furniture and decor brand in Nairobi that is offering sort of mid-market range products for the middle class. Absolutely beautiful stuff. But anyway, Sherry, when she took our program in 2019, she was actually the winner of our annual business competition, which is the result of a lot of prep work, several months process to get people to that level. And she pitched and she won out of about 100 people who had applied for that process. She was just launching her business. And now her revenue has been growing very steadily. She's raising right now about $100,000 in capital, if I'm not mistaken, but her sales have just been exploding month on month since her launch in 2019. But a couple of things that I think are so impactful about Sherry. Kingdom Business was a main reason she joined our program. We integrate these Kingdom business principles in all the curriculums that we do. So besides the business principles, how do we help entrepreneurs really understand what this looks like and give them practical tools for bringing it to life in their business? And that was one of the things that attracted her to our program. Is I'm passionate about my faith, but how does this relate to the new business that I'm starting? But Sherry now is working with over 100 artisans. So you have in Kenya a lot of informal furniture workers, and there's not a lot of organization about how they work. So Sherry, instead of building her own staff team, is working with a lot of existing experts. And as we share on our blog post on the website, during COVID, many of these artisans were only supplying to Sherry. All of their other business shut down. So it was her business that was keeping them afloat and enabling them to actually grow during COVID, increase the number of staff they were hiring. And I think, and I'll talk about this just in a second, but this concept of you have staff that you hire, and then you also have a lot of people in the value chain who have completely transformed income because of what that business is able to provide, that work stream for those artisans. And that's really, if you knew Sherry, you would understand this is her passion in this furniture business, how to help this informal artisan furniture world, which is huge in Kenya, actually have dignified, high-paid jobs. So that is something she is doing to transform the furniture industry in Kenya. And it's just really exciting to watch. She's not even 30, this woman with a big passion. So this is why we care about impact. It's people like that. Matthew will tell us another story too, but just keep that in your mind as you think about some of these numbers, because we don't want to lose that story in the numbers. So Keegan, you can go to the next slide, but I just want to give you a quick overview of our impact process. And I'll start by saying, and those on the call who have heard Matthew or myself talk about impact, we very much are students of impact, and we see that we have a lot to learn. And I think that's really our attitude towards impact, is how else can we learn and grow? Because we're so curious and we know we could be doing a lot better. So I share this just recognizing we're kind of still at the beginning in some ways of what we know we can learn and explore as we become better at doing this. But this, I've just laid out kind of a very kind of simplified view of what impact measurement at Synapis looks like and how we think about our impact. And I'll just briefly talk through this, but the first step is just defining what's called our theory of change. Some of you know what this concept is, but simply it's just, what do we want to see happen in the world? And then what do we do from there to make sure we're getting to that long-term goal? So that's something that we have set a long time ago and have been kind of working to towards that goal with everything that we measure. So that's step number 2, design your metrics, design the surveys, design everything you do in your impact process according to that ultimate goal, the theory of change. The third is just to collect strong data. So collect the right metrics at the right point in the entrepreneur's journey. So every entrepreneur that goes through Synapis programs and experiences is surveyed at multiple points. And then we survey all of our alumni every year. And that's just because, 1, we want to keep in touch with them. We want to understand what their growth is. 2, we want to encourage them so that they have something to look back on and see their own growth. 3, so that we can improve what we're doing. So step 4 is we evaluate that data. And that takes us a while because we want to make sure we do it right. Then later on in the year, we're about to do this. We run a few focus groups, and these are basically just discussions with a group of 5 to 10 people where we dig really deeply in on something that came up that was interesting from the data. That helps us better understand, are these trends that we're seeing true? What do they tell us? And then we produce white papers. So last year we produced a white paper called, it was a study on one of our alumni in Uganda. We were trying to understand, you invest in one entrepreneur, what is the impact on the farmers that entrepreneur is buying from? So this particular entrepreneur worked with 3,000 farmers, and we wanted to understand kind of the ripple effect. Our last process step is, again, to refine everything we do accordingly. Keegan, you can move to the next slide. So I mentioned that annual survey that we do, which we closed in February, and we finished our data evaluation about a month ago. but every year in January and February, we survey alumni who graduated from our programs within the past 5 years. If you have people older than that, and we are friends with hundreds of them, but as you get a little bit far away from what you've offered to them, the data gets a little bit fuzzier because we can't necessarily say that we had the same impact that long ago. So we survey kind of a limited group of alumni within 5 years. We have kind of a mix of different methods of how we get information from people, but the goal is to be able to connect on the phone with almost every alumni at that point in the year as a way to also catch up with them. And that's a big part of, I think, why our data collection works, because our alumni know that we call them at other points in the year. We really care about connecting with them and seeing how they're doing, not just collecting their data. So we've just finished our analysis recently of this data, and that's what we use to write our reports to prepare the impact report, which you're about to see. You can go to the next slide, Keegan. So I wanted to dig into a few, we talk about our impact in several ways: business impact, social impact, and spiritual impact. And I just wanted to dig into a few metrics for you. These are not all of the metrics we track. These are not necessarily the same metrics you'll see in the impact report. These are metrics that I found interesting because I think they tell some interesting stories, which I'm going to share a bit with you. So this is the business impact of the Synapis Alumni Network. Our alumni across East Africa and our partners are currently making almost $100 million in annual revenue and have raised $87 million in capital. So we're really excited about these numbers because we're getting close to 100 on both counts after 12 years of working in this space, and very excited to see not only the size of numbers, but if you see the number right below, 96% is our average growth rate in revenues, the compound annual growth rate. And just to break it down for you, what that basically means is all of our alumni, on average, every single year are doubling their revenue. And that is what we see in the data, and it's what we hear when we talk to them. So I think what we're excited about is both on a percentage and a kind of cumulative total. We're seeing really strong revenue growth, even in a period where COVID is still affecting many businesses. I mean, as everyone knows, a lot of businesses shut down during COVID. I think what we've seen in the last few years, this 96% that you see 2 years ago, the first year of COVID, there was still positive revenue growth. It was about 37%. Last year, in 2021, it was 63%. And this year it's 96%. So it's a very interesting story to see that this is the strongest year of revenue growth that we've seen since COVID hit. Businesses are coming out of that and are thriving. And that's something that we also see reflected in stories as we talk to our alumni. So very excited about this. A couple other metrics here. 51% of idea stage entrepreneurs start a business within 2 years of taking a Synapis program. So we have businesses that are in the growth stage that are looking for investment capital. We help them with, things like financial modeling and changing their sales strategies and pivoting to new products and markets. We also serve a lot of idea stage businesses, which is a huge and growing market, not only in East Africa, but in many of our partners. We're seeing a lot of people turning to self-employment as a viable option. We're seeing a lot of young people come out of college and want to start a business. So we have a lot of these, we call them idea stage, because they have an idea, but they need help to bring it to life and launch. And again, that's kind of where Sherry was, the story I mentioned earlier when we met her. She was just working on her concept. Now, a few years later, totally different story. So 51% of those we train start a business very soon thereafter. 69% are still surviving 3 years after they take the program. And actually in East Africa, the national average is more like 25%, if I'm not mistaken, survive past this point. So the vast majority of businesses in East Africa close within a few years. It's very hard to keep going. And our alumni, 69%, are still operating their business after they finish our program. Keegan, you can go to the next page. I wanted to just quickly stop, and I mentioned this with Sherry previously, but just read this quote to you before I go to the next section. What everyone in the world wants most is a good job. This was from a Gallup poll that we took. That's one of Gallup's biggest discoveries ever. Yeah, almost no leader in the world knows this. People want a good job. They don't want informal jobs or self-employment out of necessity. And that's really where Synapis is hitting. We are hitting what businesses are creating real job opportunities, not the informal job opportunities, not sort of self-employment where you create something for yourself, but never for other people. Our mission is to work with businesses who are really creating employment for other people. So Keegan, you can go to the next slide, but this is how we think about jobs, how we break it down. And I'll just briefly explain the three different kind of job effects for you. In the green bubble, direct effect. This is basically direct effect that Synapis has on entrepreneurs. So we have graduated over 2,000 entrepreneurs since our first class, which was over 10 years ago. So that's like the Synapis direct effect on, these are the people we've equipped. The orange circle is the dependent effect. These are the jobs and the lives that are impacted through those alumni. So they create jobs. Those jobs on average take care of a family of 5. And that is kind of the average household size in the countries, across the countries where we work. That is equal to over 50,000 lives that are impacted by those jobs being created and those families being supported by those jobs. Then the third effect, the final bubble, this indirect effect, or you can think about indirect jobs. And this is kind of a term of growing importance in the space that we're in, is how do we measure these other effects other than staff? So the story I mentioned with Sherry earlier, she has over 100 artisans. They aren't her staff. She can't claim that she's impacting them in the same way. They're not her full-time staff, but they are significantly impacted through getting work from her. And in many cases, like I shared with her, you have someone who went from 1 employee to 10 employees in 2 years of working with her, 10 times effect. So for a lot of those lives, we're not even representing all the families that are impacted. I mean, this number is easily over 1 million when you think about that person being given more work and then their family benefits. So this is kind of how we think about jobs. Is it's not just staff, it's not just entrepreneurs, it's not just staff, but there's a lot of other people in these supply chains, many of whom are having completely transformed lives because of the work our alumni are providing to them.
Sylvie, can I jump in for 1 second? Because I know there's
Please.
East African entrepreneurs on the call, but just to think about and amplify on what she just shared, 2,147 graduates impacting 52,000 lives through that dependent effect, and then an additional 270,000 lives. The leverage of entrepreneurs that can figure out the way to launch and grow profitable companies. And it's hard. I mean, we recognize this. Nothing about this is linear. It's not simple, but one of the real keys thematically in this work, you know, in our work at Synapis, but with our international partners, and just, I think a movement broadly around the world, is there's incredible leverage in this approach, that if these men and women that have these gifts, entrepreneurs by choice, not by necessity, to grow companies like this, you just look at, wow, the ripple effects are incredible. So I just wanted to add that. And again, if you're an entrepreneur on the call, we just want to celebrate you because you're the ones that are making this happen week in and week out, month after month. And we're just thrilled to report the impact that you have.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to go into explaining a few more of our social impact metrics. Keegan, if you move to the next slide. So that job slide is related to this one. So over 10,000 people are currently employed by Synapis graduates, and that's roughly about 5 jobs that have been created per entrepreneur. And again, this is kind of like, we can't measure everyone. We don't know where everyone is. We're very conservative in the way we calculate these things, but at least on average, that's the number of jobs being created around our network. The 51,000 I referred to on the previous slide, but that again represents the jobs created and the families of those jobs that are being created. So a lot more than just a job in terms of people who now have a different standard of income. The 83% is one that I'm very excited about because it's a very fun metric to measure. Over the years, we've seen this number kind of range from about 70% to now our highest ever, 83%. But a big part of what we train in our curriculums, and I think one of the most impactful in what I've seen personally and discussed with entrepreneurs, most of the countries where we work, corruption and bribery are just the way you do business. And sadly, if you're a Christian, it's almost even more the way you do business. It's just part of the language. And that's not just East Africa. That's across all of the partners where we work. It's kind of the same story. So you have a lot of entrepreneurs who just think, okay, well, I have to give a bribe because there's no other way around this. And that's just how the culture works. So a big part of our curriculum is how to help people really think through what does it mean to act like Christ in every decision and wrestle with all the conflicting things that you really have to think when making decisions, because there are so many variables in how you make decisions. But ultimately, are you making decisions based on how Christ would make decisions? So we have a lot of training on kind of like, how do we change this mindset of corruption and bribery? So this 83% is basically people come into the Synapis course being open to bribes. Those that come in and they're open to bribery and corruption actually change their perspective during the course. So 83% complete mindset change, which for us is a really powerful indicator that if you're talking about, again, 250,000 people that are all working with businesses that are saying no to corruption, that number is going to be growing exponentially. And that's how culture is transformed. So that's something we're really excited about. Last statistic here is 57% female entrepreneurs. And I wanted to highlight this because over the years, we've trained about 50%. This is our highest year yet. And so I think we're seeing a bit of a trend in more women supported. Most organizations like Synapis can't find enough women to take their program. And they actually have asked me, I've had this question many times, how do you get women into your programs? Where are you finding them? And then we're like, okay, we need to not highlight so many women's stories. Like for us, it's the reverse statistic where most of our competition winners are women. Many of the pictures you see in the slide deck are women, because that's actually super representative of the people we serve. And I think for us, that's just, it's encouraging that we have created, I think some of it is about the space, the community you create, the strong relationships to build confidence for women entrepreneurs to grow their business. In a lot of the countries where we work, it's hard to be a woman entrepreneur. You can't walk into a bank and ask for a loan because you don't have that kind of status to be able to do that. So the fact that more than half of our base is women is a really encouraging thing. I think another kind of culture changing statistic. Keegan, you can go to the last slide of mine. Spiritual impact, last section of impact that we talk about. And I'll just quickly highlight these. But again, driving passion behind everything we do. All of our interactions with our alumni are really based in how are we encouraging them in their discipling journey with Christ, wherever they're at. We train a lot of people that have no faith. We train a lot of people that have faith. We train a lot of people that aren't sure where they are. And wherever they are, the way that we run our programs and the way we dialogue about things are meant to help people be curious to move to the next step in their discipling journey. So 75%, this is one of the highest numbers we've seen yet in the past few years, but 75% of our alumni launch a program in their community, either to impact people spiritually, socially, or environmentally. So we talk a lot about like being intentional with what your business is doing in your community and actually thinking practically through what you can do. 75% of our alumni are doing that. 72% are actively integrating their faith into their business. That's something we've seen strongly throughout the years, is that number of just coming out of the training programs and knowing, having the tools to know how to actually do this practically. The 59% is another one that we're really excited about. Over the years, 5 years ago, I think this number was about 20%. And then every year it kind of crept up a bit. This year is the kind of the most dramatic we've seen the statistic, and we're really excited. We still need to do some digging in. I mentioned how we do these small groups to really understand a trend. So that's something we're going to be doing in a couple of months. But basically what we're seeing is 59% of our alumni are making disciples who are coming to Christ through the work of their business. And that, honestly, it blows my mind, because what we've put in place are, like I mentioned again, the theory of change. What do we want to see happen? What do we do to get there? The last part of our theory of change at Synapis is make disciples that multiply and make other disciples. This 59% is showing that that's happening. And for us, that's just, it's something that we have already celebrated as a team. And I think we'll continue to celebrate that. We're really encouraged to see that this is the passion of the alumni we work with. 66% of our alumni have completely changed mindsets in integrating faith and work. And that's also similar to numbers we've seen over the years. But again, big part of what we do is how do we help change your mindset that faith and work can be integrated? They're not opposing goals. Your work, if it's God's calling on your life, can be your ministry. And that is how you're living out your faith actively. That is the space in which you've been given to live out your faith. The 66% of our alumni say they've completely changed their mindsets on how those things go together. So I'm going to pass over to Matthew for another story and a couple other thoughts. But just wanted to leave you with those stats and celebrate some of those wonderful things that our alumni have accomplished in the last year.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvie. It's fantastic. And before I tell the story of Yolanda and Pure Purple, one of the driving passions behind all of this for us is to think about how does the kingdom of God come? I mean, in a lot of ways, that's the question that we're asking. And we don't believe that entrepreneurship is the only way. But when you think about the role that the marketplace plays, and you may have heard me say before, every single local church, every single ministry, ultimately every government depends on profitable business to exist. And so as we think about some of the hardest places in the world where we would say there's obviously inadequate economic engines, we'd love to see more investment. We want to see more development and thriving. When I look at those statistics and we look at the growth that these amazing Indigenous entrepreneurs that we have the privilege of serving and walking alongside are achieving, I think there's a really scalable solution there. So let me tell you one story here about Yolanda Odita, who runs a company called Pure Purple. This is actually a screenshot of her website, so you can go to her site if you'd like to. Yolanda joined us several years ago in our Entrepreneur Academy. So I mentioned very briefly at the beginning of the discussion, this is where we take MBA level content. We contextualize this for each market. It's a 4-month program. She completed that. Then she competed in our business competition, later went into our Fast Track Accelerator program. So we walked with Yolanda for the better part of a year. Yolanda and I have gotten to know one another and become friends. And her company, you can see it there on the screen, is a contemporary footwear and accessories brand that takes locally sourced leather and does value addition to that leather. So one of the dynamics, and we've had a handful of entrepreneurs working in leather in Kenya, is that primarily that resource is exported outside of East Africa. And a lot of that GDP benefit that comes through turning that into other things accrues to other economies. And so she looked at that and said, I see a real opportunity here. I want to move into that as a very early stage young entrepreneur. Part of what I like so much about her site is if you see there, the 4th section down, she says, our mission at Pure Purple is to showcase Africa's craftsmanship in excellence. So there is this rising movement of entrepreneurs, and this isn't just true in Africa, but all over the world, of people saying, we've got incredible resources, we've got unbelievable talent, we want to put that excellence on display for the world. But what's also fascinating, and this is just one, again, she's a pretty early stage entrepreneur. She says below that, our 5 to 10 year vision is to utilize upwards of 1 million square feet of locally sourced leather. We want to serve 100,000 consumers. And then most interesting to us, we want to create 200 jobs. And we're going to do that through premium value addition on locally sourced leather, manufacturing, footwear, and accessories. So just all of this coming together in one young woman's passion and vision to see, how can I take the skills that I have as an entrepreneur and bless lives around me? So I want to show you on the next slide just a picture of her in her manufacturing facility. She's there with some of her team. But on this following slide, I want to tell you just a brief story. And this is some of the holism that we see. So economic, social, and spiritual transformation that we see in the amazing people that we serve. So this is a picture that Yolanda sent us on WhatsApp. So this was just taken with her phone. You can see her wearing the mask. This was during COVID. And she's at a local community center. On the sign, you see Global Hope Rescue and Rehabilitation Center. So Yolanda faced a big challenge in COVID. She had her inventory largely placed in high-end malls in Nairobi, and the lockdowns in East Africa were really quite severe. And so she faced a time where she could not get any of her inventory out of these malls. Again, it's an early stage company. She's facing cash flow challenges, trying to understand, what do I do? I feel like my options are fairly limited here. Simultaneous to that, she catches wind of a need within this community center. We had no idea about this. She just shared this with us later. And there were about 100 kids that were part of this community center that needed shoes. And so she takes a step of faith in the midst of this uncertainty, trying to understand, can I even keep my business running? And says, you know what? I can meet this need. I can provide these shoes for these boys. And so she donates 100 pair of shoes to these kids. And what's particularly amazing to me about this is a Kenyan woman who understands a Kenyan opportunity in her business, sees a need in her community, and is perfectly suited to sort out, is this a good investment? Should I be generous in this way? What will happen if I make this? So much of the conversation, which is wonderful, about when helping hurts, or how can helping help, and all the things that I think for the global community, people like Yolanda, we believe, are catalytically placed to answer those questions. And again, through the pursuit of for-profit economic engines that make all of this sustainable and possible. So again, we just want to celebrate Yolanda and celebrate hundreds, thousands of other entrepreneurs that are like her. We can go one more slide though. What's fun, and we have some of our international partners on this call, this is not unique to East Africa or Africa as a whole, or even to Sinapis. So in February, we hosted our second annual Forge conference, and there's a subset of what you see in this graph of the Sinapis Global Network. And again, I mentioned briefly, Sylvie leads this for us, where we have partners operating in 8 other countries around the world. So Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda in East Africa is where we have staff and have our own offices. And then we have partners in 8 other markets. It looks like soon to be 10 or 11. But at the Forge Summit, it was a broader opportunity to draw together what you see on the left-hand side, capacity building organizations. So just think of this as organizations that help entrepreneurs gain skill, gain community, get access to capital. There's discipleship, and you see a whole exciting list of those. We had over 30 organizations represented. On the right-hand side, investors and philanthropic donors who had gathered together. So we had 150 leaders from 32 countries gathered together in Nairobi. It was an absolutely incredible week. We had asked Lord, we have working on this, Sylvie and Keegan and other members of our team in East Africa. We partnered with the Angelo Network and with Faith Driven Investor to help pull all of this together. But we share this with you now to highlight God is doing something much bigger than even what we're describing in this data. And it's bigger in terms of what he's doing within Sinapis and with our partners. But even more broadly, again, a lot of these organizations represented here, we don't have a direct relationship with, other than this sense of friendship, of being arm in arm together in this broader kingdom movement. And we are incredibly excited about what's happening with this. Forge 2024 is already planned. It's going to be in late April in Cluj, Romania. So if any of you are really excited about that, shoot me an email, let me know. But I want to show you on the next slide just one more illustration of something beautiful that God is knitting together. I actually shared this with our board a couple of months ago. So I was standing, a number of us, in fact, there's several people on the call who were at this part of the Forge Summit. But this, so James actually, who just sent a note, James was there. I don't know, he's not in this particular picture, but I saw this photo later and I thought, look at what a beautiful representative of God's kingdom this is, that you've got the US, Israel, Kenya, Mexico, Uganda, the US again, South Africa, US, Middle East, Sweden, Mongolia, Ghana, Uzbekistan. All, and this was just half of the circle taken in this photo. And so the Lord is really doing some amazing things around the globe in this area of kingdom entrepreneurship, people that have been called by God to launch and grow companies like this. We are privileged to get to be part of it. I'm going to hand it back over to Sylvie and let her share a little bit more about what this looks like for us, as how monitoring and evaluation and how we think about impact is evolving in the months ahead.
Thanks, Matthew. So I think that picture you shared is a perfect segue to this, because I think we've been training entrepreneurs since 2011, but when we created our first theory of change, which I mentioned earlier, this image for how we think about what we want to see, we were just doing training in Kenya. And now we're working with partners all around the world, but it's more than kind of training entrepreneurs around the world. I think what we see as a role for Synapis going forward is also to help equip and inspire organizations working with entrepreneurs all around the globe of emerging and frontier markets. So this is one thing we want to do, which is refine the way we think about what are our long-term goals and objectives in that theory of change, which will then refine kind of what things we're measuring and why. So that's a big thing that we're going to be working on next month, actually. The second is to help our network partners tell their impact story better. And this has been a big, I would say, value add that Synapis has provided to partner organizations in our network since we launched our partnerships with them, is how do we help you measure data and tell this story as well, so you really understand what's going on with your entrepreneurs. We need to do this better, and it's something we've been learning. We need to make something more agile. We need to make something simpler to use and more scalable. We have some of our impact expert friends on this call who are hopefully going to help us do that later this year. So this is something that our partners need, but a lot of organizations need this, how to make impact data management kind of a simpler process and affordable. And then the third thing that we are going to be working on this year is to dig deeper into the kinds of impact that our multipliers are having. And we've been using the word multipliers now for the last year. Others in the space call these kind of businesses lighthouses, or these very high impact businesses that have sort of the strongest potential for community transformation. So businesses with more significant revenue potential, more significant job creation potential. We're talking 50, 100 employees. How do we understand the impact that these larger businesses are having? Because we measure data right now largely from the entrepreneurs. Sometimes we sample other people impacted by their businesses. But what we're going to refine this year is how do we build a more robust process for measuring different types of people that are impacted by those entrepreneurs. We talk to the farmers they work with, we talk to their staff, we talk to their family members, for example. So we're going to be doing some more interesting things there to try to better understand, again, if you remember that picture with the 3 ovals, what are all the effects that happen from one of these entrepreneurs, and how do we kind of understand that in a scalable way? So this is what we're going to be working on. We have a lot of things on the docket. Again, we are kind of constantly in the learning process of how do we do this better. So excited about all the things we have lined up to help us do that better this year. I am going to close there and open up the floor for questions. And I think, Matthew, you mentioned before, but people should chat their questions directly to me or to everyone.
Yeah, no, let's, so if you want to send, and hopefully some have already been sent to Sylvie in a direct message on chat. But yeah, let's, why don't you take a look for a moment? You can also come on live if you'd like, come off mute. This is an open line, and ask any questions, but I do think we've left about 15 minutes. We'd love to hear what are the things you're curious about, what questions do you have, what doesn't make sense. Love to make the last bit of this as interactive as we can.
So, oh, great. So first, oh, no, I'm getting a lot of questions at the same time. Excellent. Okay, so the first question is, what would be a big, hairy, audacious goal your team has for the future? Matthew, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, we've got 3 areas that we're looking at for this. So the first is actually what Sylvie was just talking about. So this multiplier concept, you think of those that we serve, there's some percentage, and we're trying to understand all this and study it, that we think have really outsized economic, social, and spiritual potential in their company. So we are looking at what are the long-term services that we can provide for them. So this has not been something that we've put out publicly, but over 10 years, we would love to serve 1,000 multipliers across the global network. So that's one of the BHAG ideas. Second is we'd really like to scale our training more widely. Particularly, Sylvie was identifying this idea stage need. So the majority of entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs in emerging and frontier markets are at the idea stage. And so often we think typically their greatest need is, I need to build my skills. I need to refine a business model. I may have gaps in my team. So capacity building for them is a huge need. And so as we look at, there's millions and millions of people who need those services. So we want to scale that. That one we're still wrestling with, trying to discern what the right number over 10 years may be and how that may work. But second big idea is scale training. And then the third relates directly to what you saw in the Forge slide and the international network is how do we play our part? And I'm being careful with the language. Synapis is part of a much larger movement and broader global ecosystem, but we want to play a leadership role in how can we help as many new markets start to build a community of entrepreneurs that ultimately can become a thriving ecosystem of entrepreneurs. And we want that done with this heart for Christ and the kingdom. And that doesn't mean that we don't want to partner with others that may not share our faith. It's actually quite the contrary. But I mean, if we want to put it out, the big, hairy, audacious goal would be a thriving community and ultimately an ecosystem of Christ-following entrepreneurs in every emerging and frontier market nation in the world. And if that happens before I am with the Lord, I would be thrilled. But we know that's a big challenge.
A big challenge, but also every week, Matthew and I talk to one or two other countries that are starting this. So it's exciting to think that it's a goal that's possible. Another question here.
I'll interject one more quick thing. And when I started 7 years ago, we were only operating in Nairobi. And so now to see this kind of picture of growth and expansion, which again, we give glory to God, we give honor to partners, we give honor to the entrepreneurs we serve, who are really the frontline ones in the whole journey. But yeah, the excitement and the momentum is undeniable.
Another question here was about how we have developed our surveys and what resources we would suggest for organizations to learn and develop in this area. I'll briefly mention kind of what we do and then point you to someone else on the call. But we've developed our surveys, I would say, through experience. We use a variety of different survey tools to help us actually build them. So in terms of the tech side, we use a platform called Form Assembly, which we really like, very flexible platform for organizing surveys. I'd be happy to share some of our survey templates if that's helpful, just because I think over the years we've kind of developed like, what are the questions that you ask to get at the right thing? And that's not necessarily something someone taught us, but I think something we've learned from experience of what works and how we get kind of accurate data. One of the organizations that is a leader in this space globally is called 60 Decibels, and they have quite a few survey tools available on their website. So they're a good one to check out. There's also a guy on the call, James Waters, who runs a business helping companies measure their impact and particularly kingdom impact. So when it comes to developing particularly spiritual metric surveys, he's the expert. James, if you want to share your email or website, please feel free.
Please do.
Yeah, so those are just a couple things that I would recommend. Is James still on the call to make sure he shares? Yeah, he's cool. All right, another question was on the businesses that aren't operating after 3 years. So I had mentioned that over 70% or nearly 70% are still surviving 3 years after they take their training. It's a very good question. What are the statistics on the entrepreneurs that aren't surviving? Are they better prepared to do other things, enter other areas of the workforce? It's a great question. And I guess what I would say is we still stay engaged relationally with those entrepreneurs. So we know them and we still talk to them. we haven't done any kind of measurement on like where they are now and how the program helped them beyond the spiritual indicators. So we're still measuring kind of like, how has this helped frame your thinking about work? But we don't actually follow like where they go, because we're very focused on entrepreneurship and its impact. So it's a great question, and something that we may want to consider kind of learning about. Are there other impacts on their life, even if it's not entrepreneurship?
One other quick thing to interject there that I don't think you hit on is just the normative reality of failure in business, but then restarting with new ideas. And so some of the entrepreneurs we've seen get really serious traction later, have had multiple efforts that didn't work. We hear those stories around us all the time from very successful entrepreneurs here as well. So it's all the more reason, if we can maintain that relational continuity with people who are still after it and still trying, we really desire to do that.
Yeah. Another question here was how do we help entrepreneurs in churches? And that, I would say, is really kind of one of the main places where we've initially found entrepreneurs who are interested in this program. Is there's many churches that we've worked with in East Africa and elsewhere that are passionate about integrating faith and work, or learning more about it. And so that's a good starting point for saying, we have a program that we think can really help the business people in your church. So that is very much how we work. In all the countries where we operate, churches are a huge part of our network, of the people we serve, of the people we relate to, because we think building entrepreneurship within the local church is a way to serve the church is critical. So I think to your particular question, it would be, where are you based? Is there a way we can help you? Is there a way one of our partners could help you? So please feel free to message Keegan or myself directly about that. All right. Next question, just a question for everyone. Keegan, are you going to be sharing the recording and the PowerPoint with participants on the call? I think it would be great to clarify that for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll share a recording of this, and then we can also share the slide deck as well.
Amazing.
And another reminder is that the impact report itself will be coming out in the next few weeks. We're excited to release it soon.
Great. All right, seeing the other questions that are here. Okay, one other question was just kind of about like how to set up impact systems, whether you're a business or whether you're an organization helping entrepreneurs, kind of what tips would we give? I think the main tip that I would share, and I would say Synapis has not always done this well, so every year we're in this process of trying to do this better. It's actually easier to measure everything, and it's not a good strategy because measuring everything doesn't tell you what's most important and just kind of wears everybody out. So I think what we've learned over the years is how can we simplify what we're measuring and how we're doing it to make sure we're getting the data we actually need and want and use. So if you're just starting out with this whole impact measurement concept, I would honestly say, think, what is your main goal? What do you want to change in the world? What you're doing, how is that affecting that change you want to see? How does it contribute? And then come up with 3 to 5 things that help you understand if you're doing that. So a few metrics deeply linked to what your business is actually doing. Don't measure things that aren't related to your business because you have no control over them. Measure the things that you know you're actually contributing to directly, and keep it really simple, and just do a really good job measuring those 3 to 5 things. But start it now, because I think Synapis has found that in our 12 years of operation, because we've been collecting data that whole time, we have a lot of learning and a lot of understanding of how to improve and how entrepreneurs work and think and what things are helpful for them. That data has really helped us strengthen our organization over the years. So just start collecting data now, and you can refine it as you go.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit more on that. One of the things, I'm not one of Synapis's founders. So when I was looking at the opportunity to join back in 2016, the fact that our founders had such a clear theory of change from literally day one of operations, had data from that first year, and were so intentional, was very attractive to me. That was one of the things that I thought, wow, this is still pretty early in its journey, but I love that intentionality. One other thing I would add with Sylvie is I think, and I've written a little bit on this, I can share if people would like, but I think organizational culture, you can think of it as what kind of soil do we want the growth to be coming out of? I think is actually the first step in the process. So you can think about theory of change, which is what I think should follow after that. You can think about accountability and what's our part to play, and then what tools do we want to use to assess impact. But starting with what kind of culture do we want to have? Who am I as a leader? How do I, before God, when needed, come back to him and repent if we're out of step with the kind of values, particularly if you want to see spiritual impact? It's, are we aligned with the way that the kingdom works? And if we're not, we come back to him and we get back in line with that. So again, those would be some other things if you're interested that we could share about. We don't do it all perfectly. But part of this process, what's so important to us is the authenticity of, but this is really what we want. This is the change we desire to see in the world. And when we get out of step with that, we challenge one another and we ask God to bring us back into line with his ways.
That's great. One final question. I think someone had their hand raised. I want to make sure I don't miss this. Dixoni, do you want to come off mute and ask your question, or shoot it here in the chat?
All right. Thank you very much. Dick Suleiman calling from Tanzania. For what I would like to say, I'd like to congratulate you and appreciate the work you're doing. I'm really inspired. I'm interested to get in. I'd like to, my question is, how do you support the youth and young entrepreneurs who are passionate to join the program, those who are not on the area that's operating? Over to you.
That's a great question. And thanks so much for joining our call. Actually, we would love to do some work in Tanzania. And I've talked to quite a few people over the years there. So currently, if we're not in a particular country physically, we don't have, or if our partner is not there, we're not able to train entrepreneurs. We are working on, and we have these available now, but we're working on kind of a global offering of some online curriculum that we will have some Kenyan or Ugandan trainers facilitate an online class for entrepreneurs kind of in maybe the region. So that's something we're hoping can be available at some point soon. We also would be happy to talk to you more if you'd be interested in just exploring, like working with entrepreneurs together in Tanzania. So please feel free to write me or Keegan an email, or write us an email at the Synapis website, because this is what I do for my job, is talk to people who are interested in doing this kind of work in their countries and how we can support. So I know you're a close neighbor to Kenya, but currently we're not working there. So please shoot us an email and we can talk about it.
Thank you. I will do so.
Amazing. I think that is the end of our questions, Matthew. So I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, I want to end with how we began. Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us. Thank you for helping to make this possible. There's a whole variety of people on this call. If you're watching this in a recording, just deeply we want to say thank you for being with us in the journey through the high times, the joys, and the challenges as well. I also want to thank the Lord, and I'm going to do that in prayer in just a moment, for all the doors that he's opened, for the things that he does all the time that we don't see coming and couldn't make happen. Again, impact measurement is an imperfect effort to try to understand how we're doing with the mission, how we're doing as stewards, how can we improve. I would much rather, with peers or with external evaluators, wrestle with how can we do this better than stand before God and have him say, there was so much more opportunity that you weren't looking for. You didn't want to have the difficult work or the harder conversations to really look at how this could be more fruitful. So would love to have those conversations with any of you. I'm going to pray and then we'll wrap up. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time. Thank you for this community, for all who have been involved, Lord, the entrepreneurs, the trainers, the international partners, investors, advisors, mentors, donors, so many others, God, our staff, who are investing their lives in helping businesses grow, dedicated to Christ and the kingdom. And we pray your blessing over those courageous men and women. We pray that you would help them and give them great wisdom. Pray for all who are coming around, who are trying to serve and accelerate this progress and just want to see your kingdom come, Lord, on earth as it is in heaven. We know we cannot make that happen. We don't want to pretend that we shoulder that or that we somehow make lives change. But, oh God, we would love to see more and more and more of your spirit and your presence and your freedom poured out all over the world. Please show us how to do that. Please give us joy and strength for the journey. And just as we look at this data, God, we thank you. It shows your hand, your goodness, your generosity, and we genuinely just praise you and thank you for letting us be part of your work at all in the world. We pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.